as the revised Philadelphia Plan, one of the first examples of affirmative action implemented by the federal government. Around the same time, Harvard University implemented a similar idea as part of its admissions program, known as the Harvard Plan. It was an initiative that would consider applicants' racial background in an effort to establish more equitable educational opportunities for a larger pool of students. That plan, however, has now been ruled unlawful by the Supreme Court. Joining me now is Adam Harris, staff writer for The Atlantic and author of The State Must Provide, The Definitive History of Racial Inequity in American Higher Education. Also with us is Imani Perry, professor of African American Studies at Harvard and the best-selling author of the book South to America, A Journey Below the Mason-Dixon to Understand the Soul of a Nation. Welcome to you both. Imani, there's long been a criticism that affirmative action has allowed too many people of a certain race or ethnic background to get ahead over others. But according to the National Center for Education Statistics, black undergraduate students still only make up a very small percentage of elite universities, somewhere between 5 to 8%. Meanwhile, black people make up about 14% of the American population. So what have people misunderstood about affirmative action and how it actually is put into practice?
There's so much that's being misunderstood, and thank you for that, for that context. I mean, certainly one piece is that there's underrepresentation of black people at elite institutions, that black people comprise a very small portion of the applicant pool. And so part of what affirmative action does is actually make them visible, those who are these excellent students visible. The impact of affirmative action on non-black students and non-Latinx students and non-Indigenous students is infinitesimal. It affects about 1% or less of the opportunity of getting into these schools. But more than that, people misunderstand the context. You have several hundred years of slavery, several generations of Jim Crow. It's only 1968 when the society begins to open up. Within 10 years, you have the Bakke opinion saying, yeah, we have to be careful about doing too much remediation. And then by 1980, you have the backlash against affirmative action and any kind of remedy for this long history of racial discrimination. So we have this very small, modest remedial measure, effort to diversify the elite halls of our society. And really, now there's virtually no remedy for that multi-hundred-year history. Mm-hmm. And we live with the impact of that history every day. Both past and present discrimination shapes the lives of millions of people in this country every day.
You know, Adam, is that multi-hundred-year history that seemingly Justice Roberts didn't take into account. As you noted in The Atlantic, the Chief Justice stopped short of completely banning universities from considering race. So what does the future look like for younger generations of minority students out there who are now facing the prospects of not having that playing field or access to that playing field in front of them?
Well, effectively, if those applicants would like to have their race considered, they would need to explain in their personal essay the ways that racism has impacted their life individually. And so effectively, what the court is now asking students to do is explain the ways that racism works. And if you're thinking about, as Imani said, right, you think about that long history leading up to 1978 when you get the Bakke decision that effectively limits the role of race-conscious admissions, the role of affirmative action as a remedy for historical discrimination, and instead uses it as this sort of broader lens for diversity for all the entire student body, right? This idea that we are better when we are living and working and studying in an ecosystem that is more broadly reflective of the America that we live in. We're going to have fewer students that are actually living in those ecosystems, as we know what happens when race-conscious admissions go away. We've seen it in California. We've seen it in Michigan. In the 3 years after Michigan introduced its race-conscious admissions ban or its affirmative action ban, you saw a 10% decline in the black enrollment, and it's effectively never recovered that enrollment that it had prior to the ban.
Imani, I want to go back to the quote from Justice Jackson. She wrote in her dissent, quote, "Deeming race irrelevant in law does not make it so in life." So keeping that in mind, that she's the first black woman to ever be nominated and appointed to the Supreme Court, how do you think this decision will affect even more selective institutions like law schools and medical schools and other institutions when they're looking at the future of someone like a Ketanji Brown?
I mean, I believe it'll have a devastating impact. I think medicine is a phenomenal area to focus on, because we know that having black physicians, for example, and Dr. Blackstock talked about this on social media, that having black physicians actually has a demonstrable effect on the quality of life of black patients, right? And so there will be a major effect of this opinion. I appreciate that there are many institutions that are trying to find ways to continue to have a diverse outcome, even if they can't consider race in specific ways, but with this sort of strange exception for admissions essays, which is strange, because that question is not really before the court, whether or not students can talk about race in their application essays. It's a strange kind of dicta in the analysis of the court. So, you know, the picture that we have before us is potentially quite bleak. I think reading Adam's book this is a wonderful time, because it's an excellent overview of actually the responsibility of the state to educate its citizens. Because at the same time as we have this opinion, we have the student loan debt opinion, where other students at other types of institutions are saddled with debt. And so there's all these avenues to the professions that are being cut off at the same moment by the Supreme Court, which is acting in ways that I think are very undemocratic.
Hey, Adam, a bit to that point, on Thursday you tweeted, quote, "Just want to note that though only a handful of institutions are selective enough to need to use race in admissions, those that do are incredibly well-funded, and wealth stratification is really bad in higher education already." Tell us a little bit about what you meant there.
So effectively, if you look at the types of institutions that students attend, let's take black students in North Carolina, for example. If you're a black student in North Carolina attending a public college, about 22% of black students that are attending public colleges will attend one of the 12 predominantly white four-year institutions. 26 to 27% attend one of the 5 public HBCUs, and roughly 50% attend one of the state's community colleges. So these institutions that have not been receiving the funding that they should, right? If you think about several civil rights decisions, civil rights investigations over the years, in the 1970s, David Tittel went down to North Carolina and said, you know, these institutions are clearly unequal. The Reagan administration comes in shortly after, settles with the state of North Carolina, and David Tittel gives a quote to the Washington Post and says, this doesn't read like a desegregation plan. This reads like a joint U.S.-North Carolina defense of everything the system did, right? And so we have a system that is incredibly inequitable, that has been inequitable and was created on an inequitable foundation, that we are now further stratifying, right? If a student's not getting into Harvard, it doesn't mean they're not going to get in anywhere else. They may get in at an institution, a public regional, a state institution that does not have as much money to fund them, meaning they may need to take out more student loans to attend that institution, sending them further into debt. So as Amani was saying, right, there are these twin things happening that are just going to further stratify the system that we have.